I'm going to kick things off with debugging Angular applications. That's our topic for today. And so my goal is to cover as many different debugging techniques as I can think of. And this is something I realized recently. I was doing a training session and I had many questions around debugging. And I realized that there are so many different tips and tricks that we can talk about that I thought, hey, that's a great topic for one of our monthly workshops. So there it is. That's how I came up with the topic for today. And we'll get started instantly. So my name's Alan, or just Al, Google developer expert in Angular and Google Maps, also a Microsoft MVP in web development. Started doing Angular work way too long ago, back in 2011 with AngularJS, before it was even released. So that's really a long time ago. And yeah, I'm a consultant and technical trainer at angulartraining.com. So what I do on a daily basis is basically what we're going to do today together, which is, talking about Angular, explaining things, giving you examples. And yeah, that's what I'm still going to do tomorrow and the day after and the day after. Every day I teach Angular and I write blog posts and video content about it. And yeah, as a result, I speak at conferences as well. And I've done conferences all around the world, especially before COVID. Now it's a little bit more difficult, but yeah, I've been to all different continents, many different places to talk about Angular and web development. So another thing I want to mention before kicking things off is the Angular certification program. So I know quite a few of you are already aware of that certification and are already certified. So now we have a new platform, certificates.dev/Angular. That's where you can find the latest certifications and give it a try. It does include a lot of training, self-training content, which all comes from me. So when you go there, you'll get tons of exercises and training resources and sample quizzes and all of that. And it was all designed by me. So you won't get lost. If you're familiar with my content, you'll get just more of it at that place. And of course, once you take the exam, then you get a nice certificate for it, which is even better. So yeah, to showcase your Angular skills in the workplace. And so now let's get into Angular debugging. And I want to start with the basics, right? The stuff that you could do with Angular or without Angular, meaning any JavaScript, any web-related application could use debugging that way. So for the purpose of this session, I have a small app where you have a list of movies. You can filter those movies by, or you can't. Maybe it's broken, which is good because then we can debug it. So yeah, something's not working and we want to debug what's going on. Okay, how to do that? So first thing is, so it looks like when I type a title here, oh, this time it worked. Just that this scenario, yeah, now it looks like I'm in a better place. So we'll see if we can reproduce that bug and fix it. That would be perfect for an Angular debugging session. So yeah, the idea is I can type some stuff and it's going to filter the list. So let's say we want to investigate how the filtering works and see if there are any problems there. So in this first option, we are going to rely on the developer DevTools. So I'm opening the DevTools in Chrome. Now what I'm going to show you here works in Chrome. You could also do that in Firefox, Edge, and probably many other browsers. They all have similar toolkits at this point. So the browser I use is not that relevant. But in my case, I'm going to use Chrome. So I go to my code And I know we have some filtering going on. So filtering, here's a filter movies list method. So if I want to go through that code and debug it, the easiest way to get started, and that's my favorite, is to add a debugger statement like this. So you just add that debugger statement in here, and this creates a breakpoint. This creates a breakpoint that our code is going to stop on right there in the browser when we hit that line of code. So now, if I go back to my app and I try to type something, you see that as soon as I type a value, we got into that debugger. So the DevTools automatically got to the source of our file, and we're stopped on that breakpoint where I can watch everything from here. I can really use that as a fully debugging, embedded debugger in my browser. If I go over title, you see that it's showing that the value is P. If I go over here, we have an empty value. And from there, I can do a couple of things. I can hit the step over button, which is going to go over the next line of code. Or I can even add more breakpoints. I can just click on the line numbers here, and it's going to stop on these lines, as we go through. So if I hit play, then we're going to stop on that inside that function, and I can take a look at what's going on in here. Now, the cool thing about the Chrome DevTools, at least, is that they give us information everywhere, right? The movie object here, you can see it as a comment next to it, so you can get an idea of what the value is just by scrolling and watching this area. There's also just going over a variable, and it's going to show you the value of that variable. So that's very helpful because you don't need to just add watches on every single variable and everything. You can just go over something and see the value, which is true for everything. So here is empty, movie release date. So yeah, see, every single thing I go over, it's showing me the current value, which is, again, super powerful and makes things a lot faster. And then I can hit play, and it will just keep going and going. Now, the cool thing about this is, so there's also breakpoint in other places. See, Chrome is suggesting other places where we could stop and see what's going on. This is especially true when you have multiple statements on one line of code, right? So in my scenario here, we have multiple different conditions on one line. So it's suggesting breakpoints in the second half of that line, basically. So yeah, we could test different scenarios. So this gives us access to everything. And even more so, once we are stopped here, we can do other stuff if we want to. For instance, I can go to the console, and in my console, I can type movie, and it's going to show me the value of the movie variable. So once you're on a breakpoint, all of the variables that are currently in use, right, in that current context, you can access them in your console by just typing the name of a variable. So if you want to evaluate something, you can do that. If you wanted to call a method on that object, assuming there's a method, of course, that's not the case here, this is just data, but you can read individual properties, you could call a method, you could do a lot of funny things, which is very powerful, right? Because you can really test a lot more and check what's going on once you're stopped on a breakpoint like this. So yeah, I can hit play, and I guess I'm gonna remove that breakpoint by clicking on top of it. Then I hit play, and things are playing, and we're back in the proper state, and filtering did happen. So debugger was what I used to trigger all of that, right? And just go and pause, and then I can look over things and start debugging the application. There's a couple of things to know about this debugger statement. First, it only works if you have the DevTools open. If I close the DevTools and refresh and play with the app, nothing's happening, right? So it only works if the DevTools are open, which is good in a sense, but it's also tricky because you can forget about that breakpoint after the fact, right? So don't forget to remove it so you can, keep going and make sure you don't leave these debuggers in your code over time, because you don't want those in production typically, and it might impact other developers as well. So that was my main trick number one, using the debugger keyword to just create a breakpoint, pause there, and do your thing. So that's one thing, right? Being able to debug our TypeScript code is, of course, important. But what if we have a problem in HTML, in a template, for instance, right? So we're working with Angular, we have components and everything, and maybe something is wrong in one of our templates. So what you can do when you have the DevTools open is you can go to the Elements view here, and you can select this, and then you can select any element on the screen, right? So I'm doing that here, and see so as I select an element, it gets highlighted on the right-hand side. And from there, of course, we can take a look at the structure of our web page. I can just, go over things. As I go over a piece of HTML, it gets highlighted on the left-hand side. So this is good to get an overview and select elements and see what's going on with them, right? Now, what if I want to take a deeper look at these elements? Can I do that? And the answer is yes. So for instance, you see that here, let me select something more interesting, like this one, or maybe even this one. So when you click on an element, it gets selected, and you see that here in the margin, there's something showing up. There's this equals $0 that is being displayed. And what this means is that as soon as we click on an element, then that element becomes available as a variable called $0. Okay, so that variable, just like I did before, is available in the console. So if I go to my console and I type $0 and hit enter, I get my app movie item element. And I can open it, I can explore what's in it, and that object is the native HTML element. So I can also have access to all sorts of properties. Well, this one is an Angular component, so it's a little bit different from a regular DOM element. But if I selected, let's say, this div, for instance, so the div now becomes $0. I can go back here and show you $0 is now this div, and I can access all of the properties. So what are the different classes applied to it? Is there an ID? You can do all of these sorts of things, basically, access the properties and stuff just by selecting that element on the screen. And this one is called $0. The previous selection has become $1. So if I type $1, that's my previous component. So if you want to compare different things, different DOM elements, you can select one, then the other, and then they become $0, $1, and it keeps going, right? As you select more and more elements, you would have a $2, $3, $4. Do I have a $2? Maybe. I probably clicked on something else before that. Yes, I have one. So that's the idea. And again, to get those variables created, you just click on any element in your element view right here. So you click on it, it becomes $0, and every other element just, $1, $2, $3, $4 extra. So yeah, that's an interesting trick, right? That's something that is not obvious, but it exists. So I see a few, not questions, but suggestions in the chat. Yeah, using ESLint to complain about debugger. You can use pre-commit hooks also that are going to prevent you from committing if you have debugger. Things like Prettier can probably enforce that as well. So yeah, ESLint, your IDE, Prettier, pre-commit hooks, all of these things are possible to just ensure you're not committing the debugger statement. Yeah, these are good suggestions. So yeah, $0, $1, all of these things. These are pretty interesting options we have. Now the thing is, these are all regular browser tools. And there are a few others that you could do that are interesting. For instance, see this app, when I go over elements, they get highlighted, the background changes. Now the thing is, if I want to investigate what's going on with that element when it gets highlighted, I would move my mouse over here and the highlight goes away, right? So when you select an element, let's say I'm going to select that div. So that's the one that gets highlighted. No, it's a parent. So this parent is the one that would get highlighted. In here, when you go down to the styles section, you can toggle different element states. So for instance, I can emulate a hover state, I can emulate a focus state, a target, active, whatever, right? You can click those options and it's going to emulate different states. Now in that scenario, it doesn't do anything because it's actually doing a mouse over and it's not based on a CSS style. So the CSS stuff is not going to make any change to it. But yeah, that can be very useful if you want to check that CSS is applied properly and you can't be in both places at the same time. You can select an element and then simulate hover or focus or active and all of these different CSS states. So there's tons of things in the browser and I could spend hours just talking about that. Accessibility is another big thing that is pretty interesting in Chrome. You can check, if you're doing the right thing in terms of accessibility. There are ways to emulate your page in different, with different, same thing, accessibility settings. So you can emulate the page for people who are colorblind, for instance. So you could see if it works, if they can still use it. Tons of that. It's not really debugging, but it's part of what the DevTools can do. So just mentioning that in passing, that you can do these sort of things and yeah, emulate different scenarios with the browser without having to actually need a different environment or a person with those disabilities to test your website. You can emulate that in the browser. So that's browser tools. Now I want to get into the Angular debugging APIs that go around that, because the thing is, when I select a component here, so that big component becomes $0, and in the console, I'll be able to access it. But that's just, the Angular component. That's just, the DOM element. What if I want to get more insights into that component? So there's a specific namespace called ng available in Angular that you can use. And what I can do with ng is, for instance, say, hey, get me the component attached to $0. And I'm going to store it in a variable, const component equals ng.getComponent. So again, just doing that in the console, I'm running it, and now we have component, which is our movie item component. So I can see what's inside. There's a movie function, which is an input signal. I can see, all of the different attributes, and I can start exploring like this. Now, what's great about this option is that it doesn't require a breakpoint. So if you don't know where the code is, if you don't know how to stop there, you can just go in the DOM, select it like this. This becomes $0, and then in your console, you can do give me the component for that element, right? That's really what this means. Give me the component for that element, then receive it, and then you can watch the variables and everything that are happening in that component. If there's a method, you can call it. You just have access to everything at this point. So this ng object works for, component, directives, injector, listeners. You can test a bunch of different things. And the good thing about it is that it's going to give you all sorts of information. So it's available in dev only, right? That you have access to all of these things. You can access even the services using injector. So it's not just related to your components, but once you have a component, you can see the services associated to them. It's pretty powerful, right? And the thing is, the DevTools extension from Angular that we're going to talk about in a few minutes is just built using that same API. So everything you have here can be used to do pretty interesting things. So I see a question. If your component shows up on click, like a model, how do you get that model in a variable in the console? So you would click on a button. The button shows that model window. And once the model window is here, you just go to the elements and you select it, because that model is going to be some HTML, right? It's going to be an HTML element on the screen. So even if it's a model, you can select it. And then you go to your console and you can do, the ng get component $0, and it would be fine. So yeah, you can always do something like this, and yeah, get access to your component basically. Oh, in that case, $0 is just an HTML element. And if the component is showing up on hover, yeah, you would just first do what I did earlier, which was going, you can use this style stuff and simulate the hover state like this. Then it would be displayed on the screen, and then you can select and debug. So a little bit trickier, but yeah, you can always get into that scenario, basically, especially if you do implement specific styles like this, yeah. So yeah, that's the engine namespace, workspace functions. Workspace namespace doesn't matter. That's the same thing, and there's quite a few of them. I'll show you a full list from angular.dev. Page has moved. Yeah, so with the new Angular.dev, things have moved places at times. There you go, I found it. So the get component function is the one I used. So get component, get context. So get context is, if you're inside ngIf or ngFor, you have these local variables and everything. And yeah, you can just get those local variables from a context using this. And yeah, host element, injector, listeners. So yeah, it's all in the docs. And all of those are available under the ng global or Angular core globals package. And I'll put that link in the chat. So yeah, that's another big part of what we can do in terms of debugging. Now, there's also, of course, the Angular DevTools browser extension. And with the Angular DevTools browser extension, the idea is it's something you install, right? You don't get it by default with your browser. You would install that from the Chrome Web Store or the Firefox Web Store, and then you will get access to it. And when you open the Angular DevTools here, the great thing about it is that it gives you a view of your component hierarchy, right? So now it's not just the elements, because the elements, there's all of the HTML and everything that kind of pollute the view of our Angular components and directives. But here it's just focused on components and directives. I can see both of them. So for instance, if I go over here, you see that it's highlighting that component on the left-hand side. And I can tell that there's the highlight directive applied to it. If I click on that component, now it becomes even more interesting because it's showing us the different properties of the directive. So right now, highlight is false. And you can also see the inputs. This input is a signal. I can open it and see the value of the signal. That's another great addition to the DevTools that was done very recently. When you use signals, you can just see the value by opening the object in the DevTools, in the Angular DevTools, and then you can see what's going on and the current value of that signal. So that's also a very good thing that's visible here. And yeah, to answer another way to test what people asked about, so opening a tooltip or a model or triggering a specific state. If you don't have any easy way to trigger that state, then you can use the Angular DevTools and change values in here. So for instance, my highlight directive, I trigger the highlighted state by changing highlight to true in the DevTools. And now it's showing up as highlighted. So you can do that, right? You can just control your own code and say, open the window, and then it opens, or do whatever you need to do. That's one thing that maybe people are not aware of, but you can change the values in the DevTools here. So if you want to test different values, you just select the component. You go in here and you change. Oh, I don't want this to be highlighted anymore. I'm just going to put it to false, and then it's not highlighted anymore. And that's crazy, right? And if I want to test, different values, like here we're displaying the budget or the release date. What if the release date was wrong? Would it still work? So if I use a crazy release date with letters of everything, I can enter a value and see what happens. And it may or may not work. I don't know, I've never tried it that way. But yeah, you could mess around with values and see if the application still works or if you get into problems. So when we change a value here in the DevTools, it is changed in memory, right? So that value is changed in memory, which means if then you go to the console and select the elements and all of that, it's going to have that value as well. But of course, the value then is not persisted. So if you refresh the web page, everything goes away, right? So you're just changing things in memory temporarily when you do that. And yeah, in my scenario, I changed the internals of a signal value. So Angular didn't see it because it was inside the signal. So I would have to change the signal itself. Or maybe there should be a button to say refresh or something here. That could be helpful as well. But this is much better than observables, by the way, because if it was an RxJS observable, we would not see the data. We would just see the internals of the observable. So with signals, there's this nice built-in support in the DevTools to give us the current value. And that's very, very recent, of course. What else can I show you? Yeah, here's an example of RxJS observable, and you can see that I cannot get to the value, right? It's just the observable itself. But yeah, I can see my service, I can see my HTTP client, all of that stuff. Any service that we got injected in that component also gets displayed in the view, and you see where it was injected from. So this movie service came from the root injector, basically. So you can see that as well when you click on these components. So especially if you have, custom dependency injection config, can be very helpful. And yeah, for more info on the DevTools, so I know that there is a short video on the Angular website right here. And so it's available for Chrome, Firefox, most likely Edge as well. And they give you, well, the overview of what we're doing here, basically, at this point. So yeah, looking at all of these things. Oh yeah, you can navigate to the source as well, open component source. I haven't tried that here. If I want to go to that directive, I can click on the source thing, and it goes to the source in the browser, and then you can add breakpoints if you want to, right? So yeah, lots of cool stuff. And so you can see also that when I select an element, Angular is doing the same thing as what we did earlier. So it's assigning the component to $ng0. So now I can head to my console and do $ng0, and that would be that component. So that way I don't even need to do the ng.get component $0. I can just go to the Angular DevTools, select something, and then it becomes ng0, and the previous one would be ng1, and you get it, right? So that's another super interesting thing that they added to the DevTools here. Yeah, and by the way, the Angular DevTools, they change pretty much with every Angular version, every major Angular version these days. So it's always worth checking them out, giving them a second try or a third try, depending on what you're doing. Yeah, same thing, the dark mode was not there initially. You can toggle that on or off, depending on what you like or don't like. There's a search feature as well. So when you have thousands of components, you can look for them by name, just typing the name, and it's going to highlight it, which is easier than going through a hierarchy of hundreds or thousands of components at times. So the search, selecting, getting the state, changing the state by toggling a value and seeing the result. Yeah, lots of stuff like that. And of course, if you navigate to a different page, you can still apply same idea. And you would see the directives. So what's in between the square brackets here are the different directives applied to the button. So yeah, that's really the basics we can do with the components view. Now, I'll show you the injector tree just because I kind of mentioned it before. So you can see all of the different injectors, the hierarchy of these injectors and everything. So you can click on anything here and it would show you, like, we have a router outlet. Where does a router outlet come from? It's used by movie details component, app component. So you can click around and zoom so we can see this better and kind of see a view of everything of your element hierarchy, what's used inside that component. And when you select something on that tree, so I selected the router link here, it's showing me that it was injected from the root injector. So this one is a little bit trickier to navigate. It does have some nice tree views, but yeah, they get pretty big pretty quickly. So you have to do a lot of scrolling around to see all of your injectors, hierarchy, and everything. And the last big piece of the DevTools is the profiler. So with the profiler, you can start recording. You can click that button here. It's going to record your application, and then you can interact with the application, right? So I can click around, I can navigate to a different place, I can click, interact, and you see that it's capturing things. Then I can stop my recording, and when the recording is stopped, I can go back in history and click on any elements on the bar chart that's going to show me what happened. So basically, it's every change detection cycle that gets triggered that creates one of these bars. And when it's higher, it means it took more time. So in this example, we have a higher bar. It took 14 milliseconds at that point in time to do change detection and apply changes. So that's a good way to play with your application and see when things get slow. Like maybe sometimes you're going to click on a button and you get a very high bar like this, which probably indicates you're doing something that is slowing down the application, triggering too much change detection or something like that. This is a basic application, so I don't have much going on. Everything is taking 1 millisecond, 2 milliseconds, 0.1. So it's really super fast. So we don't have too many problems here. But that could be a good way to visualize what's going on. And there's different sorts of visualization as well. So flame graph, tree map, bar chart that can be used. So, if you have a really complex application, hundreds of components, and you start seeing some performance issues, things going slow and stuff, you can use that profiler to get a better idea of what's going on. Again, that's from an Angular perspective only, right? So it's going to show you what Angular is doing in terms of change detection. And yes, this can be exported. So if I interact with it, generating these bars, I'm stopping the recording, and then you can save that profile. And if I do save profile, it created a JSON file, and I can open it. And yeah, it gives me basically the JSON of what we did here with the timing and all of that info, but as a JSON file. So it's possible to export that. for later, so you can take another look and compare maybe with a next run in the future. And does that work with analog also? Yeah, of course. Analog is just a layer on top of Angular. So your analog Angular app would still have access to such profiler in the browser. Yeah. Now, and this is the Angular profiler. If you really want to go deep, real deep, and see what's going on in terms of memory usage, in terms of, everything that's happening in the browser, including loading images, loading JavaScript, reacting to a click event, layout shift in your application, then you can go to the performance tab in the browser. And this one has tons of stuff. And it's also changing all the time. You can record here, and then you show your recording. You'll see that it's a lot more involved than whatever we did before. So I'm just going to click around a little bit, stop. It's going to load the profile. And with that profile, you get everything. So what the application looked like along the way, along that timeline. So the changes that happened, it would show you, if we go make some space here. So all of the evolution of memory usage, the timing of everything that's happening here. So commit, paint, style recalculation, paint, function call, it's all showing up in here. And of course, there's so much info that you'll probably want to filter out and focus on just a few things, not everything, because it can be overwhelming, so much data. But yeah, GPU usage, are we using a service worker, the thread pool, how much memory is being used and everything. JavaScript heap, yeah, that's pretty useful. Well, we don't do much with in terms of memory usage here, so we won't see anything too crazy. But if that was the case, you would see, nice up and downs. So that's the timeline here. So this big bump here is a bump in a CPU, for instance. Heap, I don't see much. It's not really changing because it's a simple app, but that's where you would see your JavaScript, your memory usage going up and down, for instance. And this is the CPU up here. So with that, you can just, you have access to everything, right? So you click on a button, things get slow. You can see why, what was triggered. Was it a CSS layout change that triggered the issue? Was it that we called a function that took forever? You can really get to the bottom of any issue there. And I've used it once with a lot of success, this approach, where something was working great in Google Chrome, but when we used, well, it was a while ago. So when we used Internet Explorer for the same feature, it would hang out for seconds, literally. And any other browser would be instant. Internet Explorer would take 5, 6, 7 seconds to do the same thing. So we would do the profiling in IE, and we would see things going wrong at a very specific point in time. And thanks to that, we were able to just change the code and fix it. So we don't have to use it very often, but if you have a problem that nothing else seems to fix, getting into that performance profiler and recording it will give you everything you need, right? That's really the main takeaway here. There's definitely a lot of data. There's also network. So if you do HTTP requests and everything, you'd be able to see that. Extremely powerful, lots of information. And just like before with the Angular DevTools, you can save a profile. So you can record and save, and you can load the previous profile as well. So you can save, export, import from the tool directly. And you can even force garbage collection. I mean, it's crazily good. So yeah, we do have lots of possible ways to debug our application in the browser. Some are just JavaScript and HTML, like this performance tab. But yeah, we touched on the most interesting ones, at least from my perspective. When you get into Angular, the components view is super useful. And the fact that you can change data here to see what's really happening and see the UI you react to those changes, that's super useful. Other interesting things that you may want to look at, I don't know if you're aware of those, but so I'll mention them. If you go to the application tab, in the application tab, you can visualize what's in your local storage, what's in your session storage, what's in your index DB if you're using one. And if you have cookies, same thing. You can see what's stored in the cookies, and you can just click on stuff and then explore the values for every single thing. And just like before, you can change the values from here. So you could also edit values, type something, and it updates your local storage, or session storage, or IndexedDB, or cookies. Tells you if a service worker is installed or not. You can simulate the offline mode for your service worker. Yeah, the sky is the limit. Oh, I see someone asking about what is the sampling rate in the performance tab. It is, I think we can zoom in quite a lot. So it's probably, I don't know if it's down to a few milliseconds. It's got to be, and yeah, you can also select a specific frame like this and say focus on that part. Yeah, 5 milliseconds, 10 milliseconds, 15 milliseconds. So I would say the sampling rate is super granular at this point. I can say, hey, go down to this. What's the smallest we can do? 3 milliseconds, 1 milliseconds. So yeah, that's crazily low. 1 ms, 1.5. Yeah, it's unbelievable to be able to go that deep. Yeah. So yeah, if you have, I see a question in the chat about if you have a slow app, which area would you target first to improve performance? And that's a great question. One other tool that we have in the browser is Lighthouse. And with Lighthouse, I'm going to go to the main page to test it out. With Lighthouse, you can ask for the browser to generate a report so you can focus on performance or best practices, SEO. You can check any of these things. I'll do performance and best practices here. And I'll say, yeah, do simulate this on desktop and run it. And you click that button, and then Lighthouse is going to analyze your app, test different things. So how the app behaves under different network conditions, how your app behaves on a smaller screen, on a bigger screen. What if JavaScript is disabled? It's going to test tons of different things in just a few seconds. And once it's done, it's going to give you a score like this. So for me, it's saying performance 94, best practices 96. Okay, that's good. I'm glad I see that. But the nice thing about those scores is that if they are not too good, or even when they are good, you click on there, you go to a details page, and then you can get feedback and a to-do list on what to fix. So if I scroll down, it's saying, oh, page prevented back forward cache restoration, one reason. And then it's going to tell you, hey, you have this issue and here's how you could fix it. So for instance, here, this is the dev version of the app. So it says, hey, you could minify your CSS, you could minify your JavaScript, you could enable text compression, and it shows the savings and the improvements you could get out of that. So if you have a very slow application, you can run this and it's going to give you a lot of ideas, a lot of things to look at, basically. Maybe it's going to find a big image that you forgot about and that can be removed or improved or that kind of stuff. Or maybe it's going to find some JavaScript that takes too much time in a specific file. And it's just going to pinpoint exactly what the problem is and how you could possibly fix it. So for instance, here we're loading the polyfills and it's saying, hey, polyfills, they're a little bit slow. So yeah, Lighthouse, that's what I would use. That gives you a great place to, it just takes 5 seconds and you get so much feedback out of it that it's much higher level than, recording the performance with the DevTools, because the performance are going to give you so much information that you don't know where to start. This is already much more focused on saying, hey, you could do this, you could do that. Looks like you're making that mistake. Here's how you could fix it. And for all scenarios, you can click and then they link to a resource on how and why it's important. So learn how to reduce unused CSS. You can click here, it goes to a tutorial and tells you what you could do to remove it. So yeah. So yeah, obviously you don't want to do that on your test environment. Run that on either a production server or something like pre-prod or as close as possible to the real thing, because that's where your code is supposed to be fully ready and doing the right thing. But not on dev, because of course dev is not optimized for, not obfuscated, minified, or anything. So yeah, Lighthouse is a very, very good option. And I think I covered everything I wanted to talk about. I mean, the DevTools themselves, we could spend hours just going in there and play with all of the different tabs and everything. Even the network tab is, has lots of things that you could do in here, like slowing things down by selecting a slower network connection. Simulating offline as well is possible from here. There's dozens of other things we could talk about, but we're close to the end. So I want to keep it on time and take any questions if you have short questions, possibly. So I'll try a couple in the last 2 minutes. How can I debug a missing dependency for my component constructor? Is there a way to stop at this error and show what is available in injector that is search for my dependency? Yeah, one way you can do that is when you go to the DevTools, the browser DevTools, you can say pause on uncaught exception and caught exception. And if you do that, whenever something throws an exception, it's going to create an automatic breakpoint so you can see what was the state of the application at that point. So that would be how I would do it, right? Pause on the uncaught exception or caught exception so that when it happens, I can go to my component and check the state of that component, basically. Yeah. So that's what I would do. And the last question is super easy. Considering the speed of Angular updates, is it a good option to stick and maintain legacy code, V10, or push the team to upgrade to the latest version? You should push your team to upgrade to the latest version. There is no question about that. And the reason is because if we look at, I'm not sure where this page is, but there's a page somewhere where the Angular team tells you what's the current version and which ones are currently supported. And the support window for any Angular version is like 1.5 years. So if you're using Angular V10, it's been deprecated for years at this point, which means There's no more bug fixes. There's no more performance improvements. There's no more anything. Oh, thanks for the link. Yeah, I have a hard time speaking and doing stuff at the same time. So thanks for sending the link in the chat. Yeah, if we scroll down here. So there you go. That's the current state of things. So what's currently supported by the Angular team is just 16 is a long-term support, 18 is the current one. And 19 is released tomorrow. So when 19 goes off, 16 is going to disappear. And so Angular version 2 to 15 are no longer supported. So I would at least try to get to Angular 15 or 16 at this point. Because if you don't do that, then the dev tools won't be able to help you that much. I mean, you're just losing a lot of stuff by lots of upgrades. You won't be able to use signals. You won't be able to use all of the dev tools because they don't work with those older versions. Yeah, there's just so many reasons to stay up to date that, yeah, I would 100% recommend doing that. 2 versions behind is okay, yeah. As long as you're in the LTS support window, that's good. So I want to thank everyone for coming today. If you have any questions in the future, you can use my email address. You can subscribe to the 3 weekly Angular newsletter where I publish lots of tips and tricks like this on a weekly basis. It's free, never asking for any money. For those, the blog, the newsletter, you can just access all of that. And again, if you want to learn more about the certification stuff, you can go to certificates.dev/Angular, or you can even ask me, we can connect on LinkedIn. Or email me, that works perfectly fine as well. So yeah, thanks everyone for coming. Thanks for, yes, everything is connected to angulartraining.com. So the certification exam, the blog, the newsletter, it's all Angular training and it's all me. So yeah, have a good rest of your day. Thanks again and see you next month for our next event.